All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get this meeting of the Housing and Homeless Committee started. Member Rivera is at the doctor's office. He'll be here when he is able, if able. So let's go ahead and get started with introductions. Assembly member introductions.
Karen Bronga.
Cameron Perez Verdilla.
Randy Salt, and then staff introductions.
Alexis Johnson.
Matthew Hurt, Legislative Council.
Travis Turner, Minutes Clerk.
Great, thank you. And anyone on the phone? Nobody on the
Did I
phone.
miss
Excellent.
a memo or something?
Okay, so we have initial audience participation. I believe I have Julie Graham next.
I didn't realize he was.
Come on up, please have a seat, green light, and then please introduce yourself. And you have 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm Julie Graham, and I'm here. I have a little bit of a speech thing. I'm here as part of a new nonprofit in our backyard, and we're an outreach of Central Lutheran Church. Central Lutheran has a long history of working with homelessness. We have a lot of outreach projects that we do. Foot and Wound Clinic, Helping Hands Clinic, lots of things that Central does. And we're located right above Sullivan Arena, 15th and Cordova. In August, we met out with our West Fairview neighbors and neighborhood about the issue of homelessness. And lots of great discussion. Lots of people are very compassionate and passionate about the issue. And one thing that came out of that West Fairview neighborhood meeting was, why doesn't the church house people in the church? So we took that idea back in our smaller group, and it wasn't feasible to have people in our church. The building isn't set up that way. But what if we used our parking lot and had transitional housing on our parking lot? So that's where in our backyard developed. And right now we've worked with multiple agencies, met with lots of different groups, Rural Anchorage Coalition, Lutheran Social Services, Catholic Social Services, Christian Health Associates. I presented at the Fairview Community Council recently, and they applauded at the end, which was nice. Lots of great questions. But they listened. St. John Methodist Church, First Covenant Church, and Join, which is a fact, but it is another new name, and New Vision Architecture. So what our big ask is that the Assembly, this committee, work with zoning and planning. We need to get some kind of exemption variance to allow these shelters to go through now, not in 3 months. We want to get this up and running by September. So that's what our big ask is. I have a great fan club if they want to all stay under wave. These are all people from different organizations that support this, and we want to make it happen now. So thanks.
Thank you. And I'll just note, Member Constant, Member Brawley just joined us. And also just respond that Planning and Zoning is working on such a resolution.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Oliva. And I hope you like our clock.
I do. Democracy in action. My name is Ron Oliva. Today I'm representing myself. Rogers Park has formed an extensive and intense public safety and homeless committee, and they're going to be sending a representative to every one of the meetings to represent the council, but for sure the committee, and they're trying to get approval for a 5-minute presentation if they were to speak. So I'm here, I'm a member of that committee, but I'd like to just inform you that that's forthcoming, and I will disclose if I'm representing the council or myself. So with that said, I first am impressed and always have been with Central Lutheran Church as a real member of the community that has extended beyond normalcy in accommodating and providing a good example to how to deal with the homeless. So if they're going to do anything, they stand with a strong reputation of acceptance in the community. And if they say something, they'll stand by it. So hats off to them now. I'm going to endorse their projects because they are a responsible organization, whether they're a nonprofit or a church. And they're a good member of the Fairview community. That brings me to myself and the tent. I was serious last night when I said I will store the tent. I'll even pay the transportation up here because the tent is a multi-purpose tent that I think I can erect on my property for a training center. And one thing I have to tell you, I recently hired over the last, probably 10 days, hand snow shovelers with little tear numbers at each shelter. And I got a good response, and I put out $12,000 to hand shovelers. They want to work, they're able to work. And I think when you see my proposal for the training center, for bike repair, for car detailing, little mini cottage industries that they can train for and acclimate back into society with good paying jobs, $20 an hour. I only had one guy. It's a long story. There are characters, but Home Depot was paying $35 an hour. I couldn't match that. But what I want to say, I will have that proposal for the use of the tent. And I've sold a bigger tent. One covered the clarifiers at Point Warrenzoff, and I sold it to the contractor who built the Comfort Inn. It was huge. I've owned one, sold it to North Slope. So I'm real familiar with tents. But if you have any questions, sounds good. I don't know why you fall for this, but everything I said, are you in agreement with that and are going to write me a check? Don't raise your hand. You stay safe.
Thank you. Okay, we're joined by Member Rivera on the phone. Okay, so I believe that's it for initial audience participation. Move on to unfinished business. 2023 Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan Implementation Update. I assume Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, through the chair. So to give an update, our shelters remain full. We have 274 beds at the Aviator, 100 at the Alex. CWS has 200. And we did close all warming sites. One was at CWS, one was at Golden Lion, and the other was at the Aviator. We do still have a budget shortfall, which has been identified. And through May, the budget that we are requesting is $2.265 million. We'll just round up $2.266 million. And then we do have about $500,000 that was put forward under a substantial amendment through CSD at the health department for HUD funding. That money has not come through yet. So if that does come through, it's around 500,000. So that number minus 500,000 would be our delta once that HUD funding comes through. And this is for all shelter sites through the end of May, with the exception of the family emergency cold weather sheltering. We have met with the Coalition to End Homelessness, and we have some remaining emergency rental assistance funds that remain within the Muni CFO office, and that appropriation will most likely be coming forward on the March 5th assembly meeting. And that amount of money, let me get you a number on that. sorry about that, is 568,000. And that will be hopefully appropriated by the body on March 5th to go to Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness for decompression of family emergency shelter that we have through Christian Health Associates. So we're going to prioritize using those funds to house families that are in need so that families do not go unsheltered at the end of April. Any questions?
Member Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate this update. I've been asking for kind of a more detailed breakdown, either on a weekly or biweekly basis, whatever's reasonable, because we want to track the spend down. So I'm behind on my email, but I haven't seen that come through the last few weeks. And I guess my question is, you mentioned this 568,000 of HUD funding. If it's on our March 5th meeting, it was not introduced in the last meeting, and there needs to be I believe, a public hearing of all appropriations over 500,000. So I guess I'm just asking generally, please keep us in the loop because we're trying to help. And then also just want to understand the spend down through the end of May. And I do have a specific question. So you mentioned operating all shelter sites through the end of May. Last time we got an update, I believe you were checking in with the hotels and then knowing that at least one of them is being renovated for other uses. So can you comment on exactly how many beds we expect to have through the end of May that we could use potentially?
Yes, so we just received an email from the Aviator, I believe it was this morning or last night, asking about contract extension through May. So that's a meeting that we are going to have with them. They have not, their original contract has a step down plan, but I believe they're willing to extend that through May. So that is good news. The Alex Hotel is willing to go through the end of May. And then, as you know, CWS is a municipal asset, and so they are willing to extend through May. And then as far as breakdown, I did not recall being asked for a weekly report for spend down, but I have the spend down report and I can send it to you right now if you'd like.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe it's not weekly, but I think something more frequent than monthly. Because again, if we're seeing that we're underspending or overspending, it's going to be, we can definitely, I think, find the funds, but it's going to be tight to figure out where they come from, including from alcohol tax fund balance. So just, again, want to make sure that we're tracking that closely. Thanks.
Okay, anything on non-housing and outcomes?
So as far as exits to housing, through the Next Step program, we've had over 50 people exit emergency cold weather shelter into housing with services, and they have maintained that housing. I believe it's 53, the number, but it's over 50 right now.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Baranga?
Are there any discussions ongoing about keeping the CWS open through the summer? And then what have you started as far as the demobilization? My constituents are very interested in that. I know that you, being the administration, is hesitant to say you can go here for liability reasons, but we really want to know that there's going to be an organized plan for demobilization rather than just a sleeping bag tent, and wish you well.
Yeah, through the chair to Ms. Branga. So our goal has always been to maintain CWS through the summer at a capacity of 200 people. We do know that about 550 people will hit the streets come summertime with the closure of the Aviator, which is 274 people, and then the Alex, which is 100 people. And we have about 250 to 300 people currently living unsheltered on our streets. So as far as continuing CWS, we would love to continue that facility. We would just need to identify funds to keep that running. And I hope that we do get there. As far as moving into summer, March 5th, there is the administration had put forward changes to abatement code and where people cannot camp. And so by therefore establishing where people cannot camp, we've kind of pseudo established where people could camp. And so that most likely, I would assume, would result in a work session so we could have more open discussion of where people couldn't camp. But that is a fear for us this summer if we do not keep shelter up and running, where people will go, because we know that they will go unsheltered. So it's kind of a community narrative at this point of we need to establish safe places where people can be rather than just saying where they can't be.
Thank you. Member Brawley?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just respond also to Member Branga's comments. So the $4 million for operating money for the summer months of shelter is basically the main thing we talked about down in Juneau with 30 legislative offices. So just talking about our priorities, we've made that one of our top ones. And so I've already scheduled, or hopefully scheduling a follow-up meeting with the Bronson administration folks to talk about that, because we really need to have a unified strategy of actually getting that in the budget and making sure that it's not vetoed. That's really the goal. And so we are working on that because as we shared with many other people, we have committed to keeping it open in the winter. We don't necessarily have the funding to keep it open in the summer without making cuts to other services. So it is a huge legislative ask. And we are going to continue to ask all of our assembly members as well to speak with your folks, because we all need to advocate for this as well as the administration. So I know that wasn't a question, but it's really important context. Thanks.
Okay, moving on to transition out of emergency cold weather shelter, which you've already kind of touched on a little bit.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Member Rivera.
Yeah, sorry, I need to get it. So, and I apologize, maybe I missed it. Are we still on the non-housing outcomes part of the agenda?
We haven't got there yet.
Oh, we haven't got there yet. Okay, got it. Until we hear from that. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, Member Rivera, I believe that's where we are right now. That's the next step.
Okay, got it. So then, before we move on to the housing work, which I think is fabulous, and I'm happy to hear some updates on the housing work, I am curious about some other non-housing outcomes. In particular, I know that there has been some efforts to connect folks to services in particular, substance misuse treatment. And so I would love to hear an update from the health department or the provider on some of those efforts. And then would also like to hear if there are any other mental health or behavioral health services that are being provided to folks. One of the things that we obviously are trying to do this year is get folks prepared for housing and these services. That's why I phrase this as non-housing outcomes, because I wanted to speak to all of the other parts that are very important as we get people prepared for housing. So if the health department or the provider could speak to those, that would be helpful.
So we only have Ms. Johnson here, so we'll let her take a stab at it.
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, I can ask the contractors on site what mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse connections that they have. I was not prepared to speak on this today, and my apologies, but I did not. I wasn't given this agenda until about 18 hours ago, and so I won't be able to speak on this.
Okay, so transition out of emergency cold weather shelter.
As far as transition, we're still working with Next Step Initiative. We have, and I just got confirmation, it's 53 people that have been moved through emergency cold weather shelter into sustainable housing with wraparound services. Our goal remains 150 people moving out of shelter and into housing, and so that work continues. We do have plans to continue sheltering through May 31st as long as funding is identified. Is there any additional exits or things you would like to discuss?
I think one, real quick, I think one is, can you elaborate more on the plan for camps? You kind of touched on it.
Yeah. So on the March 5th agenda, we did introduce some changes to the abatement code and what abatement looks like under the current Martin versus Boise. Martin versus Boise has been picked up by the Supreme Court for review, and we will have an answer to that most likely in late June. But up until that time, we are proposing changes prior to summer. Some of those changes include distance from an emergency shelter or distance from a licensed shelter, excuse me. We would like to not allow encampments within 10 square blocks of a licensed shelter for the public health and public safety of shelter residents. There's also size limitations. So any encampment that is over a certain size, we believe it's about 50 people, is a public health and safety risk for the people in the encampment. We're hoping this kind of creates a mechanism for self-governance to say, hey, our camp is this size. We don't want to add more people to it. It becomes problematic at a certain size. And so we hope that there triggers a little bit of self-governance, self-managing. There's also trash cleanup. So if you have an encampment that is full of trash and we come through and we say, hey, this is a public health issue, we'd like you to clean up your camp. We will post an abatement notice and give them essentially a 10-day cure. And if they don't cure by the end of 10 days, they get abated. Our goal is for a little bit of self-governance within these camps because we know that the camps will exist, and really to like hone in on the safety and security of those encampments.
So will the municipality be involved in these camps other than maybe providing allowed camps or spaces? And my main concern is who's going to be running these camps and how are we going to ensure that they get off to a good start, mainly around security and not allowing the gangs and drugs and violence to get a foothold in these camps? How are we going to help whoever's going to run these camps get started?
Yeah, so the reason we introduced this so early before summer hit is so we had an opportunity to educate people who would be going unsheltered or people who are currently unsheltered through outreach. It's just an educational component to let people know these are the rules. This is where you can and cannot camp. If you're caught camping here, this is going to be problematic for you and anyone who's staying in your encampment, and to really put some rules around it. These rules are enforced by a multitude of entities. The Anchorage Health Department has outreach workers that go into encampments. Healthy Spaces is our Parks and Rec alcohol tax funded staff who clean up these camps. ACEH has an outreach team as well. And then of course, law enforcement. So what we want to do is we want to create a mechanism of communication between campers and municipal staff to say, these are the rules. And if you don't follow them, it's problematic for you guys. So we'd like you to follow these rules. And we hope that there's some level of self-governance. We've seen success under that model, or at least what we would deem success in encampments, because encampments do not equal success. We want people housed. But at the Mountain View and Snow Dump, we see people who've kind of taken on a leadership role, and the camps are less problematic because rules are followed and abided by under a mutual understanding.
And I assume this will have requirements for water, waste, sewage.
Yep. So we have had discussions where if an encampment is X amount of people, we will provide bathrooms, dumpsters, and there has to be some level of cleanliness within the camp. So you don't have these massive bike chop shops or trash just, strung everywhere. It needs to be a health and safety priority for encampments.
And starting off with an APD presence as well. Member Brawley?
Yeah. I had two different questions, one on the camping. So let's say there's 60 people in a camp, for example, what would be the first step in that situation? And I say that because I'm hoping that it's not simply just immediate abatement or that kind of thing, but that if it's helping or not helping, but encouraging folks to move or to disperse, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So just in a side comment with Member Rivera, I would like to have a work session so that we don't just have, it feels like gossip or like I'm telling you something that hasn't been fully unveiled yet. But I really do want to have a work session so that we can come correct. There is discussions of current encampments and what those look like under this new rule, such as Mountain View or Cuddy Park. And those really haven't been ironed out yet. But yes, that is something we have discussed. So I would love to hold a work session or a special committee meeting to go over these new abatement proposals.
And yeah, I would certainly support that. And sorry, my other question was actually going back to the extension of shelter through May. So I understand funding is critical. Can you just remind me what the steps are that we need to keep in mind? So there's identifying a funding source. We'll need to appropriate that. And then there will be extension of contracts. So what sequence do those need to happen? And are you guys working on that?
Yes, so we have all the documents drafted for contract amendments to extend these. We have communicated with all except the aviator of the contract extension, and parties are all willing to do that. We have identified what our shortfall is right now, and we'll get those numbers to you guys. And so we'll introduce, hopefully at, I would say, the March 2nd meeting in March. I'm assuming we can't get it done by March 5th, but second meeting in March for introduction, and then paid out first week of April or whenever the vote, or second week of April at the meeting.
Thank you.
Member Bronga?
So it sounds like we'll flesh out this in a work session, but besides 10 square blocks from a shelter, I would suggest you're looking at schools, playgrounds, picnic areas, recreation centers as having some distance from for others' enjoyment of parks.
As far as recreation centers and schools, I have not explored that. That's not a priority for us. We know that recreation centers are high utilizers in the summer, especially when kids have nowhere to go when school is out. So I don't personally see us looking at recreation centers or nearby recreation centers because those are safe places for children. One thing I do want to talk about that I missed in the abatement proposal is the possibility of safe sleeping sites for people in vehicles. One of the things that we will most likely ask for is a clarification under law of people. So you have people who are living in cars, you have people who are driving cars that are living in encampments, and then you have people who tow a junk vehicle that's inoperable into a site. And so those three things most likely will be needed to be distinguished in code so that we have rules around them. So we don't have something like we had at 3rd and Ingra where vehicles were towed in and then left. And then it basically was a free-for-all at the parking lot. And so we really need to distinguish those three subcategories because I think they are important for people who are living in their vehicles to have a place to sleep.
Okay, I believe we'll move on to next step progress report. And I believe we have the coalition, Anchorage Coalition, to make presentation. Come on up.
Yeah, I can turn that on. Cool. Thanks. Yeah, let's just give Steph time to fix the presentation.
Yeah, and we're just working on getting presentations up right now.
All right, thank you so much. Jessica Parks with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and I'm really excited to share with the committee and members attending the progress report for outcomes on the Next Step project. So this is information as of yesterday, but I dated the presentation for today. So just to start off and recognize, everyone agrees the solution to homelessness is housing. Everyone is housing ready, and housing first is the key. This project operates under a housing first methodology, and Anchorage is a housing first community. Next slide, please. This is a screenshot straight from our website. You can track this progress on the website and find out more information as well as links to any news articles that have been written about the pilot to find more information. But you can see as of yesterday, we were at 65 people housed out of the goal of 150. That number is slightly higher than the number Alexis was talking about since we did start this a few weeks before we launched it out of emergency cold weather shelter. Next slide, please. All right, next up, by the numbers. Again, all of these numbers as of yesterday. So right now we have case management contracts with 2 organizations to provide the ongoing case management support for tenants through this project. We have currently leased apartments from 12 different private landlords. We have housed 9 couples. So we have been seeing some of those efficiencies with housing more than one person in an apartment. We have provided 130 pillows to people moving into apartments through this project. And out of those 65, 26 of those clients came into the pilot with some individual resources, either a housing voucher to help support their rents, other sources of case management, or income to be able to pay a portion of their rent themselves. Next. Oh.
I'm good for you.
Okay, it's a pretty short one. So measuring success. When we started this, we outlined a number of metrics that we were going to use as measurements of success or positive impacts of this project. A number of people experiencing homelessness in Anchorage, looking at that number from the end of October until the end of January, you'll see that we have seen a reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness in Anchorage. Percentage of exits to permanent housing destinations at the end of January, people exiting the homeless prevention and response system, 36.9% of those exits were to a permanent housing destination. And then, as Alexis shared as well, the pilot project so far has 0 returns to homelessness. So everyone who has been housed through this pilot continues to be housed as of yesterday. All right, so what's next with this pilot? We are creating our second by name list. So we came into the emergency cold weather shelter at the Alex and created a list of everyone who was at the shelter at that time. So we have had some people leave the shelter themselves. Some people left the shelter because they were asked to leave the shelter. So we are nearing the end of that initial list. So we'll be creating that second list based on the census there. We continue to recruit landlords. On our website is a lot of information about the project and landlords who might be interested, being able to access that information and reach out to provide information about the units they have. Preparation for phase 2 this summer. Our goal is to be able to secure enough funding to be able to do this outdoors this summer and be able to truly use that Houston model of decommissioning encampments by housing people out of them. And then soliciting support for the continuation of that project, continuing to approach philanthropy, government funding, private funding, to be able to support the continuation of the project. And next slide, which is the end. So thank you so much. This link here has a direct link to our website, ach.org/next-step, which is kept up to date on progress made towards achieving the goal of 150, as well as information for landlords and the public on how they can help.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thanks for that report. Very helpful. A few questions from me. The 12 landlords that you have relationships with right now, does that represent all 65 units that are being utilized right now?
It does. It's less than 65 units since we have 9 couples. So,
Yeah, thank
but
you.
yes.
Good reminder. How has the response been from landlords so far?
The response from landlords has been great. We've had successes on both ends, us reaching out to landlords and asking if they're interested in participating, and having landlords reach out directly to us. We've had one landlord who had units that he had been using as short-term rentals, and he approached us and said he wanted a more stable rental relationship with tenants, and so actually converted those units from short-term rentals into long-term rentals for this project.
Great, glad to hear that. And then how many prospective additional landlords do you have already?
Right now, and I did not bring that number, but I know of 6 that are going through the process right now of identifying the units. We do a health and safety inspection on the units prior to moving someone in. So that process is underway with 6 additional landlords, as well as some of our existing landlords have more units. So as they have had natural vacancies come up, they've been adding those units to our stock.
Thank you. And last one. So for this phase 2 for the summer, what is your goal? Because I think having the goal has been really helpful to like paint the picture of the success. Is your goal to house another 150
It is.
people?
So our goal is
Okay.
to house another 150 after the closure of the emergency cold weather shelter up until the time frame of emergency cold weather season again. So yes.
So if some of them had vouchers, then this will stretch further than 150. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
I was just curious, what's your, I'll put it as residence time? How long are people spending in the shelter?
Ooh, that's a good question. I know that we created that first by name list at the very end of December. So some people had been in the emergency cold weather shelter since it opened October 16th that were on that list, and some people had just entered the shelter at that time. So the longest would be anyone from October 16th forward. We are seeing that backfill happen. So as people are housed, more people will come into the shelter. As you've seen on the dashboard, the shelter has stayed at capacity. So hopefully we're creating that capacity churn with it.
Good, thank you. And maybe a question for Ms. Johnson. I know there were comments of people moving or leaving the Golden Lion, trying to get into emergency cold weather shelter. Is that still ongoing, or is that kind of nipped in the bud?
Nope, that has been nipped in the bud through the chair to Mr. Saul. I'm sorry. That has been nipped in the bud. I think one of the things that we just consistently do is educate people on, hey, emergency cold weather shelter is closing in April, and your spot at the Golden Lion, which you have a lease for, you know, this is secure housing with wraparound services. You're allowed to have your services there. And, you know, that might not be an option come April. And so, yes, it feels good in the short term, but long range planning for you is not a good idea. And so they understand that once you sit down with them and work with them.
Great, thanks. Let's see, moving on. More questions? I think we're good. Implementation of modular unit shelter pilot program. Thank you, Ms. Parks.
Through the chair to the body, I don't have an update for the implementation of the pilot program right now. I know that we were working on an RFP, but that has not moved forward. We did hear about In Our Backyard, and from my understanding, that's all private. And it's possible that some of these dollars could be used for operations, but from the standpoint, we're just waiting on planning and zoning and this to really continue moving along. And we'll get that RFP up and running here shortly.
And I'll just add, it's my understanding in my conversation with planning and zoning that they're just out getting feedback on what they've drafted. And I suspect that should be coming to a close here pretty soon. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess sequence of events, are you waiting for planning and zoning before you put out the RFP, or are you going to put out the RFP while planning and zoning does their thing?
Through the chair, I believe we have to make it legal to allow for these to put out an RFP, because we would be asking for a proposal on something that's not legally allowed. And so it really determines where it's going in the city. And if there is like thresholds for how many can exist in the city. So I think we're waiting on that.
Yes, Ms. Bronga.
So the RFP would be for operator for a pilot shelter community. And since Ms. Graham is in the room, can I ask her, is she interested in applying for the RFP? If you're saying that you don't think she is using public dollars, but I would like to clarify if that's possible.
Through the chair, I have no problems with that. I just don't know the rules of committee procedure allowing audience participation.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, Ms. Braga.
So Ms. Graham, so on the record, I just wanted to ask if when the RFP comes available, are you interested in applying with this project?
Yes, we are, yes. Any other?
Thanks, and it's just for operator, is that correct?
Through the chair to Ms. Braga, the funds are for operator only, not acquisition of the structures.
Yes, okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think brings us to new business, and we have the Home for Good update. There we go. Excellent.
Hi, oh, that one's not me. I'm Sam. I'm the housing director at United Way, and I'm going to loop in just really quick 2 of our other programs so that we have kind of the full picture of our work. So next slide, please. So we at United Way partner with the Alaska Court System's Eviction Diversion Program. That program started in March 2023, so it's about a year old, and it offers free mediation for landlords and tenants across the state. So if a tenant in that program is in Anchorage and the reason for their notice to quit or their potential eviction is due to non-payment of rent, if they can pay their rent going forward, we get a referral from the court system. And then we check and see if double check their income and get all the verification, and then we can pay their past due rent. So through that partnership, we've helped prevent 47 evictions since March 2023. Our other arm is our landlord housing partnership. And this is a partnership where we really focus on providing services to landlords. So there are 3 main pieces of that. The first is PadMission, which we refer to as kind of a Zillow for case managers. It's a closed system where landlords have already talked to our staff about what different housing programs look like and that they come with case management. And then landlords can post their available units on this web platform. And then case managers can look at the available units, and it has lots of helpful information about, if pets are allowed, what the deposit is, all of those helpful things. And then if a landlord is housing someone exiting homelessness, we have incentives that we can provide at lease up, and then another round of incentives at 3 months of tenancy for a retention incentive. So since February 2022, we've helped 88 households move into apartments through those landlord incentives. And then the third piece of a resource that we have for landlords is risk mitigation funding. So if there are damages that exceed the security deposit, we can work with the landlord to see if we can reimburse those damages. All right. And then Home for Good is our permanent supportive housing program. It uses a pay for success financing model. So I'll do a quick overview, but if anybody wants to talk about it more, I'm happy to do more explaining. We started with philanthropic funding to get the project started, but then the municipal funding that comes to Home for Good is only paid if we achieve outcomes. So that's the pay for success framework. So United Way has contracts with service providers. Those are case management teams that provide services to the participants. And those service providers are entering data about the person's lease and housing history. And so a third-party evaluator every 6 months crunches all of those numbers and figures out how many months of stable housing the project has achieved. And then we invoice the municipality using that evaluation. And then we use that funding to keep funding the project. So we had philanthropic funding help us get started, but then the funding going forward depends on if we're actually achieving success in housing stability. This is where we are in the project. So we extended to a 5-year project, and just kind of gonna, there's a lot of rows here, but doing an overview, we're almost at the point where we're going to stop enrolling new people, because we want to make sure people have a runway to get to a housing voucher before Home for Good, this part of Home for Good ends. And then on that bottom pink part, you can see we're right now running just on municipal outcome payments. And then the stars in the middle are just marking that every 6-month evaluation point. So a little bit more detail on where we're going from here. We'll have our last referrals sometime this summer, and then our last new participants enroll early in the fall. We'll have our last evaluation period be the data from October of this year to March of next year. We'll have one, I guess we've skipped one. I missed one earlier. We'll have one outcome payment this coming June, so June 2024, but the last one we can have per the contract is June 2025. And then we'll wrap up services in September of 2025, and then have one more evaluation, just kind of putting all that data together. So this is a picture of what that 6-month data looks like. We get a lot of detail on housing stability. So that's an overall project picture for everyone that has ever been housed in the project there on the left. And then the bar graphs are showing pre and post lease data for emergency services. So we have, for example, the first one, the safety center intakes between 90, so it's 93 people for these bar graphs, 1,380 safety center intakes 12 months before people had a lease collectively. And then we can just see that reduction to 328 intakes after people had a lease. So we continue to see these really great reductions in emergency service use every time we have that evaluation.
Couple questions for you.
Yeah.
Member Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. This is really great outcome data, and I'm glad years ago was involved in this project, kind of at the theoretical level, right? So glad to see that it's actually moving and that it's helping people. So you had in an earlier slide, basically this program, is finite. It's part of a grant. It's part of that program. And then in theory, the government takes it over in the future. I wonder, is that something you guys have started contemplating or requesting to the municipality? And then also, I think just to check, what is the last kind of scheduled appropriation from the city at this point? Because I think we put it in the budget for 24, but I've heard that this was the last year or something. So is that accurate for this current program?
So for the first one, we are definitely, we're clearly well aware that the need for this work continues, and we have talked to service providers on, we've done a lot of work in this project and gone through a lot of hurdles, learning how to make it work for everyone. So we have service providers that are interested in continuing doing this work. We're definitely interested in having the work going forward. So I'd say we've started those conversations for sure. And then for appropriations, I think we're on track to get to the maximum in 2024. So I think the appropriation that already happened in 2024 is the remaining amount. And then we, just based on our last few evaluations, we think that either in this upcoming evaluation or maybe in the December one would hit our 4.5 million max. So we actually tap out on outcome payments that we can receive in that contract.
And who has been getting the outcome payments? Because I know you mentioned philanthropy funded this. Kind of where does it actually go if it's going from the city to another entity?
United Way.
Okay.
So we hold the funding, and then we pay service providers for the parts we've agreed. We're paying for some on-site services at the guest house still, and then we're paying people's rent.
Okay, Member Rivera.
Yeah, thanks. Before I get into my questions, I just want to provide, from my perspective, the way that I see this, sort of a broad explanation of Home for Good and where it fits in the continuum of care. Folks may remember when Houston came up here, they talked about the population that they really focused on serving, which they themselves called the easier to house individuals, were the folks that they prioritized to get housed. And folks may remember that they talked about the current roadblock that they are on now, which is the more difficult to house individuals. And now they're having to come up with sort of new innovative ways to figure out how to house and provide services, and really working with the medical community for the most difficult to house individuals. I think Anchorage is somewhat unique in that we, I think, are working on really all sides of this equation. If you think of a pipeline of individuals, easiest to house, moderately difficult to house, most difficult to house, I think Home for Good squarely fits in the most difficult to house category. And then the next step is in that sort of middle category. And then we have some pretty good diversion programs. So I think we are actually somewhat unique in that we are working on all parts of this spectrum. So I really applaud this work. I think it's critical. I just had a clarifying question. So United Way is not asking that the municipality of Anchorage take over this program. I think rather United Way is interested in continuing this program and continuing a partnership with the municipality on this program.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. It just got me a little nervous when it was suggesting that we, the municipality, would take it over. And I don't think we're best positioned to do that. Okay, great. When are you going to be presenting that? Because this would be a contractual negotiation you would have with the administration. The assembly would be involved. I remember the first round of this, it was a fairly lengthy process for us to get to yes in the end. So when do you envision starting that process?
I think we're definitely ready to figure out what those next steps are, and then to start that process. We've made a lot of headway in recently in the last few weeks, really talking to service providers and making sure we know who could participate and kind of what we would want in that next contract of how much time and how many people, and then one part would be around if we are keeping the pay for success part. So we're happy to keep that outcome based tie. That does make it a little bit more complicated for us to bring on new service providers, but we've learned how to do that, and we can certainly keep that rolling.
Great, thanks. And then the last thing I'm asking for, and you might not have it now, so if you can just produce this for the future, that'd be helpful. It would be interesting to get a history of the invoices that from the beginning of the program. So starting with philanthropy and then through the municipality, just what those invoice amounts were. Because I know we appropriate $1.8 million in the alcohol tax fund for Home for Good as part of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm fairly certain that we don't use all $1.8 million in those success payments. So it would be helpful just to get a sense of what those invoices look like.
Sure.
Thanks.
I have a couple more if you want them.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
And then I just want to throw out, we have 87 participants housed right now. And then our probably, our easiest to describe lesson learned is that we've had a lot of success around having a block of units for many reasons. One is that it's, it's hard to get access to units in a pretty low vacancy state for many years. So we've had blocks of units at now the guest house and the Barrett. And that's really helped us. We've heard from the service providers that helps them shorten the time to get people to housing. So when they're doing outreach and they're approaching someone and saying, hey, we can help you with this broad array of services, which includes housing. And instead of, we'll help you get on a wait list, when the guest house opened, it was, there's a room. And that made a huge difference in their relationship with those participants. It also provides a little bit of economy of scale for service providers when they have, 20, 40 people on there that they're trying to see, and a lot of them are grouped in one place. And then it's easier for us to add a layer of safety support or staffing support in units like that where they're kind of grouped together. So it's not the whole building, but we definitely are finding some benefits there. And we've heard from other participants that it can provide a little bit of a better tie into a sense of community for sure. And then last one, I think. And then our challenges are definitely housing vouchers. This is our biggest challenge. The wait times are very long and the process is really difficult to navigate. Units are going to continue to be a challenge for us. And then staffing, it just really affects how we're able to give referrals to those service providers. So like many other industries, our service providers are feeling that challenge in hiring. And that's it.
Thanks. Any questions from members? Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to your eviction diversion slide, I really appreciate the number of 47 evictions prevented since March 2023. Do you have a sense of the trend of eviction notices? That's something that I have been wanting to follow pretty closely because there's an obvious, at least to me, an obvious correlation to me between a rise in eviction notices and a rise in homelessness.
Sure. I don't have the data for that, but we can certainly ask. The court system would be the best one to help us track that. I think the program itself has had an increase partly in just people learning about it. And I think there'd be sort of two different things. The eviction diversion program, you don't have to have an eviction notice you don't have to have a notice to quit to be in that mediation program. So we might have sort of two different ones of here's the issues we prevented and here's the trend of evictions actually happening.
Thank you.
I guess just a follow-up or an open question. Is there anything that we can be doing to help you be more successful?
I think as much advocacy as we can get around housing vouchers will help all of the programs you've talked about today, for sure.
Can you elaborate on you mentioned the process is difficult, and I kind of look at it as you're navigating this process multiple times with clients. So I imagine you're probably getting good at it. So what are some of the rub points or what makes it so difficult?
Sure. There are at least 12 different housing vouchers that our participants can apply for. Some of them, they fit a little more squarely in the eligibility requirements for. But I'm going to take this one from the case manager perspective. They have to be tracked individually. So I think from our perspective, if the burden really sits on the case management team for the Home for Good population of applying for all of those housing vouchers, and they need to log in to each individual account for the ones that are online, but only one, maybe two, only one or two of them is housed online and the others are still paper. And then there are a few that go through the Department of Behavioral Health first, and then they go to AHFC, and then they go to NeighborWorks. And so the process for each one is different, and they're just really hard for people to track. And then with the wait time, we've seen people wait for one for 2 years, for 2.5 years. By then, their case manager could have changed. The likelihood that the case manager change could be high. The person could have also switched case management organizations. So the follow-up is really hard for our community. Even when we're sort of pooling together, we've had a few really good partnerships where a different organization says, hey, we helped this person sign up and, you're the case management organization, they're up on the wait list. But I think the number of people that are going to drop through that process is high. And then the turnaround time for a lot of follow-up questions or, okay, it's your turn now, you've waited for 2.5 years is 10 days. And so for us to, especially if it's a newer referral, connect with someone, have all of their IDs, all of their stuff ready to go in 10 days, even if we ask for an extension for all of them, is really short. And I think the flip side of that is if you if you have a longer time period, the wait list is longer. So I think we have just a system problem of it doesn't work well for people that are applying.
So what would you recommend versus 10 days?
We can ask for an extension. So I think if
I mean, if it wasn't 10 days, what would be ideal? What would be helpful?
I mean, I'm hesitating because I know that the longer I say, the longer that could make a wait list. But if you had a new, someone that you didn't have an existing relationship with, or you didn't know where they lived or something, you'd at least need 2 weeks, but really 30 days to get an ID together and get all of that would be more comfortable. We've asked for multiple extensions for one person.
Okay, so 30 days. And then with the 12 different programs, 2 online, rest paper, is there any movement, or would it help to have like a common application?
It would be incredibly helpful to have a common screening application. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Member Felix?
Yeah, it's all good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I'm wondering how I would love to dive into this a lot more, because the more that I learn about this, the more flustered that I get. Let's just put it that way. So when I think about this list of people waiting for vouchers, I think of it as like a by name list. We have people on a list and they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So is that list not something that folks like United Way can get access to? So these are the clients that we have that are almost up.
We've helped the service providers in Home for Good create like an Excel spreadsheet where we've put their wait list number so they have an idea of who's up next. But there isn't a central place. So the way I think of it is that it would be really cool if there was a case manager version of that login system where they could see multiple people at once. I think that would be incredibly helpful. Being able to see multiple wait lists at once would also be helpful. Even the background check procedures are different for different vouchers. So someone might get denied for one, but be eligible for a different one.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, that brings us to Assembly Housing Action Plan. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you. So folks will remember that in January, we had a discussion we went through the Housing Action Plan, and we had a discussion of all of the possible strategies I forget what the Housing Action Plan calls it specifically, but each strategy has different tactics underneath it. And so these are all of the tactics underneath the various strategies. And we discussed the ones that could possibly fall under this committee as a committee that should maybe spearhead some of these efforts. And so these are all of the ones that I recall from that conversation. Definitely invite folks, if you think maybe I got something wrong, to please let me know either now or contact me offline. I certainly don't intend to keep this full list here because it makes it look like we are going to have a very long meeting every month, which is not the case. So what I will probably do in future meetings is just narrow this list down to maybe some of the things we will actually be discussing in the short term in this committee. But I just wanted to present the full list for now. And just to recall, we did have this conversation in January. Thanks.
Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I know we definitely need to get back to thinking about this. So I just want to flag a few things that I think would be helpful to talk about in the future. Excuse me, one on the first bullet, focus investment on reuse of vacant and abandoned nuisance properties. I don't know who else has been briefed on a plan from ACDA, AWWU, and the planning department, code enforcement, working on basically a federal funding request for for flipping around some of those properties. And so I would encourage you to talk to folks. I'm working with a couple others on a resolution of support for that. So hopefully we'll see that on Tuesday's meeting, provided I get it done in time. So follow up with Mike Robbins, but that's something that is moving forward. And then another one just to flag is the dashboard. I think that's something we need to talk with our legislative services staff about getting that completed. That was discussed as maybe a contractor task with the housing funding that we saved for the assembly. And so I haven't thought about that one again, but I think we want to keep that one on the radar. And then the other one I wanted to mention is it is several bullets down, but it's the one that says collaborate with landlords, housing and service providers, et cetera, on fair housing, tenants' rights, eviction prevention, and language access resources. So we had started talking about a relatively small project, Felix and I, Mr. Rivera and I, to basically fund creating communication materials. So a toolkit that could be for landlords, that could be for tenants, it could be translated into multiple languages, really addressing, tenants' rights and all those things, kind of what's current law and other aspects of it with the goal of eviction prevention. So I haven't done anything else with that one. I have a reminder to myself to keep working on it, but I just want to flag that one as something that I think would be really a great thing to continue talking about in the committee. And then, of course, all of these are important, but those are the ones I wanted to pull to the front.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to speak to? Yeah. Okay, Assembly, Legislative, and Budget Priorities.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for this agenda topic, yesterday, without much fanfare, we did approve the 2024 Assembly's priorities, and this, I believe, reflects that document. I think it reflects maybe a couple of the housing parts in that document and reflects all of the homelessness parts in that document. So just like we did for the 2023, these are going to be continually on the agenda, and we'll focus on these as we need to. I will say just for now, we just in this committee did have some discussion around making sure that we ensure adequate funding for the rest of the current winter and then a smooth transition for summer operations. That's something that we've discussed in this committee. We also had a preliminary discussion, and we'll have a work session or a special committee meeting to talk about the refinement of the camp code abatement. That's something that's also in the works right now. So some of these items we are actively working on, and I'll make sure that we get updates on these as they progress. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Any final comments? Okay, this brings us to final audience participation. Anyone in the room? Please come forward.
Okay. Chris Stoner, President, Midtown Community Council. I really like what I'm seeing, but I'm also seeing a huge hole, and that's called the camps. If you want to go out to Cuddy with me and walk around and see what's going on, I will be glad to help you do that. We have no restrooms. We have no fresh water coming out there. When we have breakup this spring, it's going to be a mess, and it's a health hazard. And the only possible stop to that health hazard, increasing it is to get some outhouses out there. And doesn't seem to be reflecting at all in your plan. The other thing is we need security. We need the fence put back up on Denali. We need somebody to talk to us on where we as citizens think this should go. There were some ballards out there, cement ballards that the city moved in. All they did is took a pickup, some chains and rope, and they moved them. So the gang group had free access to the camp. They still have access to the camp, and they are still controlling the camp. We have a black pickup that shows on a regular basis into the parking lot where the car campers are. He actually blocks the entrance. I don't know who he is. I don't know if the police know who he is. We need some help out there, and there seems to be no funding. We have over 50 people in that camp right now. How are we going to prevent more people from coming in? I don't think we can. And this land is supposed to go up for sale soon, is what we're hearing. If that land is sold, have you protected Cuddy? Is that on your list of places to not have another camp? Or are people just going to move from one spot to the other spot? So if someone buys that property, who would want to? Who would want to build on that property if they have another camp on Cuddy property? I guess those are my questions for this body. Thank you for your time and patience. And you guys put a lot of time in, I realize that. But stop and think about the community and how it's affecting us. And it's affecting us on a really detrimental area. And I will spend one little minute talking about a story from my own personal business. My son came to work and found a really expensive purse next to our dumpster. He brought it into the shop. We get people in the dumpsters all the time, but we've never had a purse left. We opened it, and there was a kit for fentanyl and heroin. I kept that purse in my office for several days before someone retrieved it. I'm affronted by that. I should not have to see that. I should not have to live that. My employees should not have to see and do this. We need help. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Okay, anyone on phone? Nope.
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Constant.
Yes, Mr. Constant.
So I just want to speak to the notion that was brought up that the Assembly is not trying to figure out funding for bathrooms. And I just want to say that there is, in fact, a bond proposal to purchase and secure public facilities so people do have a place to go. And the League of Women Voters is doing a public session tonight that will describe it.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, I also just wanted to comment that, so we have a contractor for bathrooms within the municipality. And after last summer, they are in opposition of continuing to put bathrooms in homeless encampments unless they are paid a higher rate, because they're losing their units essentially to fire and to damage. And they're actually losing money on it. So what we did is we put out a new ITB about 2 weeks ago for a higher rate of bathrooms. And we did disclose that they were in homeless encampments, and we had 0 bids on them. And so the next step for us would be looking at acquisition of municipally owned porta potties and then asking for service of those, or putting it out to bid for service of those units, because the liability is in the owning of the units and the damage that comes with that. So we are trying to explore options. It's unfortunate that that's where we're at right now, but we're still trying. I don't want to say that we're not.
Member Brawley?
Yeah, just very briefly, I know we're trying to end the meeting. Ms. Johnson, about how much do we pay per year, to your knowledge, not just in the camps, but maybe overall for porta potties?
Yeah, through the chair to Ms. Brawley, I can get those information through Parks and Rec. They are the ones who normally do all the bathrooms in parks and trails. And then I will bring forward before first quarter budget a request for bathrooms for summer encampments and what that looks like.
Great, thanks. Anyone
I can
else on
answer
the
the
phone?
question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have it from Parks that our budget line is $450,000 annually for portable bathrooms.
Okay, anyone else on the phone for public testimony? Okay, thanks everyone. Appreciate you coming, and we are adjourned.